Hi, my name is Byron Earnheart. I'm the programming director at the Barret School of Banking in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm also the host of the Main Street Banking podcast, a podcast for community bankers and put on by the Barret School of Banking. My journey to Barret, and I guess to Tweezle for that matter too, is pretty long and complicated and marked with a lot of the financial history of the last 20 years. I graduated from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and with a degree in finance in 2002. And for those of you who lived through that time, you do remember that there was there was 9/11, and then at the end of that, right at the tail end of that, there was Enron and WorldCom, and so the demand for finance students was pretty low and weak. I was able to get a job as a teller for at Union Planters Bank, where I served in the Kmart branch. So did the in-store banking thing, spent some time there, but I was in my field. I was in a field that I love to do. My ultimate goal at that time, though, was to be a financial advisor. So about 2006, I got my Series 766 and became a financial advisor towards the end of '06. Again, if you remember that time, that was right before the Great Recession really starts to kick in. So not a great timing there. But then I went to work in 2008, went to work as an insurance wholesaler for a company, working with stockbrokers and other financial advisors and presenting life insurance concepts, more complex life insurance concepts to their clients. The day that I started, my company lost 50% of market cap value in the crash in 2008, and I was on the floor at a brokerage company when it hit the dollar menu. So very tough time there. So I found my way back to banking and ended up back home in a sense in Tunica, Mississippi, North Mississippi, an hour south of Memphis, where both sides of my family grew up and have their roots. And so I'm back home. Served in banking for about 5 years after that. And now, at the end of that time, I had gone through a really tough time mentally in my life. And I had known Chris Kelly, our executive director at Barret, for a long time, had talked to him, and he had an opening to be his programming director, where I come up with content, work on creating new classes, just get to talk banking. Just get to talk banking out to the public and to other bankers, talk to other bankers, teach them banking, teach them concepts, get to understand and learn the conversations that are going on in banking and putting those out there, as well as some new ideas and putting in furthering the conversation of banking. So best job I've ever had, best job I could possibly have. And of course, that led me to Tweezle here with Justin and Nadine. And I'm very excited to be a part of this and continuing that conversation about banking and ways that we can make things better. Well, some of the topics that we talk about at the Barret School that I'm particularly interested in is one of the things is understanding what I call the language of banking. If you come at banking from a more traditional business background or even more accounting background, you can get lost in the weeds really quick with banking if you start opening up our financial statements and looking at our ratios. And the ratios that we use are similar to what you may have learned in an intro to accounting class or a managerial accounting class, but they're computed a little bit differently, and they mean different things sometimes. So that's one of the things that I really spend a lot of time doing, is working with newer bankers and developing what I call the language of banking. And like any other language, learning any foreign language, it's one thing to learn the vocabulary. It's one thing to learn the basic where's the bathroom questions. It's another thing to sit down with a native speaker and engage that native speaker in the language and to have dialogue and not just regurgitate what you've learned in the textbook, but to understand and have communication and have meaning in that conversation. And so that concept to me is one of the big things that I work on in banking. Another thing that I work on in banking is culture and leadership and using emotional intelligence. That's a big topic with me. And on the podcast, we're actually in the middle of a series I'm calling Superhero Community Banking, which is taking Sun Tzu's Art of War and translating it into community banker, which I know is probably the most engaging and interesting sounding podcast topic of all time. But there's some really interesting points there that Sun Tzu brings up in his treatise about culture. And understanding the culture of an organization, and in that case, the Army, the culture that's created there is the difference in victory and defeat. And if we think about that in terms of our banks, what that means, and understanding how emotional intelligence fits into that idea, um, you'll find that, and then start applying that into our communities, you'll find that that's the difference between a good bank and a great bank many times. Another topic that I'm interested in banking is ag loans, ag lending. Um, yeah, I made mention in my intro about the joining the banking school and kind of going through an existential crisis in a lot of ways towards the end of my time in banking. And during that time, I had to teach myself ag lending in a lot of ways and seek out mentors within my bank to learn that concept. Again, coming from North Mississippi, small town, USA, ag lending and agribusiness is a huge part of who I am and who my family is. And then understanding that there's over 4,000 banks in the country that have agribusiness on their books. But if you really get into ag business, you'll find that, like banking, it kind of has its own language too. It kind of takes a different skill set that's complementary to a traditional commercial banking background. But agribusiness takes a little bit different approach and a little bit different mindset, a little bit different cultural mindset, I would say, even to really implementing and really understanding its implications at the bank, especially when you start thinking about its role in our communities. And so many communities, one of the biggest economic injections in a lot of small towns is when the banker signs off on the production loan. And that becomes a big deal. That becomes a very big deal in the economy in your community. So let's see. One of the other things I'm very passionate about, as sort of a dovetail off of that last point about ag business, is the meaning of financial intermediation. And that's a geeky, nerdy way to say banks' roles in the community. And if we really understand that, and I don't care what size bank we're talking about, we can be talking about the large banks, we could be talking about the small banks, their roles and the mechanics are very similar. And understanding that the American economy and a capitalistic economy doesn't function without a bank or something like a bank performing the roles that they do. Businesses don't get invested in, homes don't get built, money doesn't change hands at the vendors and at the shops. People don't save for college. All these things that happen that make the economy what it is and make the economy the great thing that it is, knowing we've got problems. I'm not turning a blind eye to that, but the good that comes out of that, that's a bank. That's a banker in the middle of that, making that happen. And one of the things I'd like to talk about further, and that we show on the podcast, and I'd like to showcase here on this show, is the good that we see in banking, this good stuff that's going on. Let's have those conversations about the good, and let's have the conversations about, hey, you know what, we screwed up on that one. We need to do a better job in this field too. So those are some of the things that I like to talk about on this show, and that I like to talk about at Barret on our podcast. And whenever I'm sitting around smoking a pipe and playing guitar and engaging with other bankers, that tends to be where the conversation goes. Thanks again for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed our session. I hope you learned something. I hope I made your day a little bit better too as well. Be sure to check out the Tweezle site again to get more content about banking, guitars, pipes, whatever else I ramble on about. I appreciate y'all tuning in. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks a lot.